let's take a look at the handout, a comparison of language and music learning. This should be in your packet that you have. First, we're going to go through how our first language was developed, which is, for most of us, the language of English. First, children hear and absorb the sounds and rhythms of language, and it's a random response. This happens from day one when a baby is born. We talk to them, and they just listen to us and have a random response. The next step is they begin to imitate the sounds with no comprehension. And this is when they begin to coo and babble at us. They may begin to imitate exactly what we're saying, but there's no comprehension. It's just playing with the language. The next step is that babies associate an object or person with its label in spoken form, and they accumulate a bank of words with meaning. So now, mama and dada have meaning to them, and ball has a meaning to them. The next step is they orally recognize a familiar word when spoken in a phrase or sentence. So now we can speak to them, do you want your ball? And they'll begin to understand that and maybe respond with excitement. And again, this is all orally. And orally means that they're hearing it. They understand these words just by hearing the sound. The next step is they accumulate a bank of sight words, isolated familiar words that the child recognizes in their written form. And this is something that we see in these little word books, like I have here about animals, where there's a picture and the word written right under it. This is a dog, so they begin to develop these sight words. The next step is that children will visually and orally recognize a familiar word when written in a phrase or sentence. So now we can begin looking at words, books with sentences in it rather, and they may begin to identify words that they're familiar with. They may have that word dog as a familiar word, so when they see the sentence, I have a dog, you can read I have a, point to the word dog, and they'll know what to say. The next step is they can figure out unfamiliar words by using what has been learned about familiar words in spoken or written form. And so this is where children will figure out words by maybe understanding the rhyme of it. So they know the word dog, so maybe they can figure out the word hog because it's an og word, and by sounding out that H sound before it. The next step is that they're able to use words sensibly in complete phrases or sentences. And the last step is that they learn the rules of our written language, grammar, punctuation, sentence structure, etc. And this is something that we're constantly learning as we progress through school, and even as adults, we're continuing to learn the rules of our language. That is a very advanced step of language literacy. So those are the steps of how we develop our spoken language. Now, we believe at Foundation Music School that the language of music should be learned in a similar way, that is the most natural and developmentally appropriate way for children to develop the language of music. So now let's look at a child's steps to music learning, and we're going to parallel those to how it relates to language learning. So the first step in music learning is children hear and absorb the sounds and rhythm of music and have a random response. And this is something that we do in our Family Music 1 classes. But again, even from day one, when you're singing lullabies to your child and randomly singing la-la-las and bum-bums to your child, they may respond to it randomly, but mostly we're concerned with them just hearing and absorbing lots of music and sounds. The next step is that they begin to echo patterns on a neutral syllable. So in music class, this happens a lot in family music too, where we'll sing bum, 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 and children will begin to echo that exactly back to us. Bum, bum, bum. That's the neutral syllable. Then next, they begin echoing on solfege or rhythm language. So instead of just singing bum, 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 a child will be able to sing so, mi, do. That's the solfege. The rhythm language that we would use for a different pattern, maybe a pattern of bum, bum, bum. The child might echo do, do day. So those are the languages that children will begin echoing back. And that starts a little bit in family music too, but we do that a lot in family music for 3s and 4s. The next step in music literacy is they orally recognize a familiar pattern within the context of a song or chant. We start doing this a lot in Music Makers class. So in Music Makers class, we might sing the song, "Mouse, mousey, in the housey, hurry, hurry, do." And the teacher may ask, "I want you to listen to the song and listen for the pattern, so, mi, do." When we begin to sing the song, "Mouse, mousey," some children will hear it right away and raise their hand, I heard it, that's so, mi, do." So that's called, the fancy word for that is partial synthesis, where a child orally recognizes that pattern within a song. The next step is that the child will see familiar patterns in notation. And this is where, in Music Makers class again, they will start seeing patterns in notation just like this. This pattern says, so, so, do. And this pattern says, do, mi, so. So they're going to begin to recognize these patterns by how they look on the staff for solfege and in rhythmic notation for rhythms. The next step is they will orally and visually recognize a familiar pattern within the context of a written song or chant. And for this, this will happen a little bit in Music Makers, but a lot in World of Keyboard and Music Makers at the Keyboard. In their keyboard books, they will start to see musical notation. And the first thing we're going to do is look for patterns that they're familiar with. We may ask the child, look through the music and find the pattern, so, mi, do. So we'll look through the music, circle all of the so, mi, do's. Then we'll look for another pattern that they are familiar with already, like do, do, do. They're going to find it in their music and circle it. So we'll take that process, circle all the familiar patterns in the song, and then we're going to sing the song on solfege and see if they can figure out what the song is. Here we have so, mi, do, so, so, mi, do, so, do, 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 do. And what we want the child to be able to do in this step is to recognize that that's mouse, mousey, in the housey. And they will. Most children recognize that right away and will shoot that hand up or shout out, that's mouse, mousey. So that is an exciting step in the music literacy process. The next step is recognizing orally and visually patterns in unfamiliar settings. So this happens in keyboard classes once they get to book 2 or the green book. And in this book, they're going to start seeing mystery songs that are unfamiliar, songs that we haven't sung before, they haven't heard on one of their recordings. It's completely unfamiliar. But they're going to be able to figure out what it sounds like from the patterns that they are familiar with. So we'll do the same process of finding familiar patterns in the song. We'll sing it through on solfege, and they may not know what the song is still, but at least they're going to know what it sounds like and be able to hear it in their ear. The next step is improvising and composing with familiar patterns in melody, rhythm, and or harmony. And this is really exciting part of the process where children get to compose using the cards, the rhythm cards and the tonal cards. We do some of that actually in Music Makers, and we do a lot of it in keyboard, playing at the piano, using the patterns that they're familiar with, composing songs in their books using patterns that they're familiar with. And then the last step is learning and explaining the theoretical foundations for musical concepts. And this is very high level music learning where they can understand and be able to describe components of music. So hopefully that gives you a general idea of how music literacy compares and is learned similar to language learning.